Hare Krishna, welcome back to our continuing discussions on the Bhagavad Puran as part of our Bhakti Yoga Journey series. So, having uh, completed canto number 2, today we will enter into the next canto, canto number 3. And this is a very, very interesting canto. The third and fourth cantos are quite long, and so many important concepts through beautiful pastimes are narrated. And the one of the beautiful highlights you will see of these two cantos is how one very important principle of the bhakti tradition is how uh, certain principles of devotional service, they need to be imbibed, or they can only be imbibed when you see a living example. So these are some things that cannot be taught. You just have to observe and absorb it. And those can be learned only by closely understanding the life of Mahajanas, life of these advanced souls. So in these two cantos and even the subsequent cantos, but so far our discussions have been fairly philosophical, especially second canto has been very philosophical. But from this point on, the Bhagavatam very beautifully is going to highlight these important principles through the lives of these great devotees. And what makes these pastimes so special is, while the principles of Vedantic philosophy are there, they are not something meant for philosophical discussions or debate rooms, philosophical debates, but rather that philosophy has to translate into our living and being. And that how do I apply this philosophy? How do I when I imbibe that philosophy deep into my consciousness, how does it manifest? For that we need to see living examples. These are the living Bhagavatas. So in these cantos we will now see examples of living Bhagavatas, starting with Vidurji in this particular chapter. So we need to rewind back by more than a year ago when we discussed the 13th chapter of the first canto. There Sutta Goswami, he explains that how uh, at that point, or Sukadeva Goswami, he mentions that how the great personality Vidura, a great devotee, he having entered the forest, he got instructions from the great sage Maitreya Rishi, and Maitreya spoke to him and so on. So that description of Vidura having received some special instructions from Maitreya was discussed that time. And then consequently Vidura came back from the forest to save his brother Dhritarashtra, and then we went into the birth of Parikshit Maharaj, and then the whole of second canto. So at the end of previous canto, the sages of Naimisharanya, they remembered that particular aspect. And then they wanted to know what exactly was the conversation between Maitreya and Vidura, because they know the greatness of the devotee Vidura, and therefore they wanted to know something. Definitely something spectacular must have been discussed there. And that's the segue into the third canto, where now the same conversation that Vidura and Maitreya have had are going to be covered here. It's also interesting how that question was asked, because if you remember, we ended the previous chapter talking about the 10 topics of Bhagavatam, starting with Sarga and Visarga, the primary creation, the secondary creation. Interestingly, the main theme of the conversation between Vidura and Maitreya is also Sarga and Visarga. And so that question was not prompted randomly, but rather it's the most apt question at this point, because the topics of Sarga and Visarga are now going to be explained, detailed through the conversation of Vidura and Maitreya. So that's the connection of the third canto in the bigger scheme of things. So Sukadeva Goswami also because he wanted to explain the Sarga and Visarga through this conversation, he starts explaining that how the great saintly personality Vidura, he received instruction from Maitreya Muni, And he explains that how Vidura, he left home and went into the forest. So that triggered the curiosity in Parikshit Maharaj. And so Parikshit Maharaj, he asked this question, that where did this meeting happen? Where did Maitreya and Vidura meet? Where did this conversation happen? Can you please describe all the details to us? So then, and then very interesting point, he says that Saint Vidura was a great and pure devotee of the Lord, and therefore his questions to Maitreya must have been purposeful on the highest level and approved by learned circles. Very important that he says that these questions must be variashi, highly purposeful. So this is also very important. Sometimes we ask questions for the sake of asking. Many times, if you look at the whole world, the entire internet is filled with questions, right? And people trying to give answers to this question, or you look at check any news media, right? There are constant questions and answers going on. But a question should have a purpose behind it, right? In fact, what enhances the potency of a question and answer is when the person asking the question is asking genuinely and wanting to apply it in their life, and the person replying also should have some kind of a understanding and realization of that answer to whatever extent, and then accordingly, then the potency in the question and the answer will come. And Vidura, being such an advanced devotee, his questions are definitely going to be very, very deep and purposeful, right? But then the question may be purposeful in a sense that Vidura wanted to apply it in his own life. But at what level is this question? That's also important. Sometimes, for example, when you are really sick, you go to a doctor and ask, what is wrong with me? Definitely there is no casualness in that conversation. You are very, very serious about that conversation, right? But at what level is it? Improving your physical health, or sometimes somebody will go and ask a question like Prabhupada, he quotes in this purport that how inquiries by mercantile men in a business exchange cannot be expected to be of the highest level. Like sometimes the stock market, people are asking question, oh, which stock is going up, which stock is going down, is the crypto going to go up and go down? People ask these questions, but then at which level is this question? So having a purpose is one thing, but at which level is that purpose? That is also important. Vidura was not only purposeful, his question was at the highest level. And most importantly, his question was also sadhuvada. It is approved by other saints and sages. So that shows the authenticity behind the question. So a question answer is worth investing our consciousness in if it has purpose, if it is of highest level, and most importantly, it has to be authentic in its nature. Such a conversation is worth investing our consciousness. Other things are vyavaharika. Vyavaharika means just for the practical nitty-gritties of life. Sometimes you may have to involve in certain conversations. That is good. But they are not worth investing your consciousness in, right? This is a very important point, especially as spiritual seekers. So this is also, when we say, let's tie it to a philosophical aspect that we studied already. When we discussed that in the Chatushloki Bhagavatam, where Krishna ji says to Brahma that how anything which is not connected to me and seems to have a value is just my external energy. If something which is disconnected from Krishna and still is looking alluring, that is Maya. Right? So this is the point. So things may look interesting, they may look purposeful, but if they are not of the highest level, then such things can be just an external energy of the Lord. Right? And the proof is that in such mundane activities, the advanced sages and saints, they do not indulge in that. For them, as Bhagavatam described, this is just a pilgrimage for crows. Right? If you've seen very, very graphical analogies Bhagavatam gives, crows, they like to only loiter around garbage cans. Right? So that kind of topics, and if you see, the entire internet is filled with garbage cans, and all the likes that you see, all the followers that you see, the subscribers that you see are like crows jumping from one garbage can to another garbage can, looking for more and more garbage in their life, right? So, and when garbage goes in, what comes out will also be garbage. So a seeker of spirituality should be very careful in terms of what they are feeding their consciousness, right? We are so conscious about the food we eat, right? Today, relatively, the society has become more health conscious. Even brands that were into junk foods are also now, at least, I don't know how true they are, but at least they are trying to brand themselves as healthy food alternatives, right? So we're so conscious about the food we feed. We are not, we have to be equally or perhaps more conscious about the information we feed into our inner space, right? So this is a very powerful lesson that this chapter begins with. So then Suta Goswami again. So the camera now shifts from Parikshit and Shukdeva back to Suta Goswami and the sages of Naimisharanya. So they says, okay, so now that's being questioned. Now please hear these topics very attentively. So then he says that, he gives a little background about, so there are two main characters in this chapter, Dhritarashtra and Vidura. So if you see these two, first we'll analyze the character of Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra, it is said, Sukadeva Goswami describes, King Dhritarashtra became blind. So we know him. He was born blind. But the blindness a sadhu sees is not physical blindness, but the blindness of consciousness. He says King Dhritarashtra became blind under the influence of impious desires to nourish his dishonest sons. And thus he set fire. So he lists all the atrocities that Dhritarashtra took part in. He set fire to that lacquer house to burn his fatherless nephews, the Pandavas. He did not raise, he could have stopped that fateful gambling match, but he did not intervene. He allowed the whole fight to take, the entire battle of Kurukshetra to take place, right? Even when Yudhishthir Maharaj came back after, though he was a very noble sage, he did not want to create unnecessary rift in the among the members of the Kuru dynasty. So he accepted the 13 years punishment, right? And after finishing the whole thing, he comes back and says, okay, now as Kshatriyas, we have a dharma to rule. Give us just 5 villages, we'll be happy with it. Even that, Duryodhan did not agree, and Dhritarashtra supported that order. So if you see Dhritarashtra's entire mentality, you may say, oh, Dhritarashtra, yes, he's the real villain of Mahabharata, right? He's the big cut. It's easy to label, but there is a little bit of Dhritarashtra hiding in us also. And when this Dhritarashtra comes out, if you look carefully the character of Dhritarashtra, if you've seen any whatever TV series or any plays on Mahabharata, poor Dhritarashtra, they always there is a sense of pity that may come in the audience when you look at the character of Dhritarashtra, because he acts very helpless. But this helplessness is the disguise that Dhritarashtra wears to hide his attachment. Many times we mask our attachments in the external guise of our weakness. This is the character of Dhritarashtra, and the Dhritarashtra within us also, where we do not want to confront our attachments. We don't want to deal with our attachments, and rather we just say, oh, I'm helpless, I'm weak, I can't do anything with my life. I'm a victim here. Somebody else is the oppressor, right? We don't want to take any corrective steps in our life, and by allowing that victim mentality to breed within our consciousness, you are empowering the oppressors, starting with your own anarthas, right? Whether it be an external aggressor or an internal aggressor, you are empowering them by allowing yourself to, and many times you may even put up a scene of being emotionally very soft hearted, but that is just again another veil that we wear to hide our moral weakness. So don't get into that habit of hiding your moral weakness uh, behind as some kind of an emotional softness. Many times, like in the case of Dhritarashtra, Vidura, he straight away goes and tells, because after the whole when Dhritarashtra, Yudhishthira, after the exile, when he comes back, and so he asks for 5 kingdoms. So Dhritarashtra calls all his council of ministers, and Vidura was the prime minister. He asks him, "So what is your opinion?" He says, "First, throw your son out." Duryodhan, if you don't throw him out, very soon he'll be the cause of the entire destruction of the Kuru dynasty. Throw him out first and give the kingdom back to Yudhishthir. It was a very unjust means through which Yudhishthir was cheated in the gambling match. But he was very much attached to his son, right? And then, so then he said, "Oh, poor Duryodhan, he grew up as a son of a blind father, so not only did he feel himself as a victim, his the people that he was attached to also, he started projecting them as victims, right? And he's an innocent boy, you can't be so harsh with him, right? So actually Dhritarashtra knew that Duryodhan was taking to the side of adharma, but when we become weak, we justify our position towards the people of criminal tendency by displaying some kind of an emotional softness, right? I mean, you don't have to go back into by 5,000 years into Mahabharata. Just look at the news around you, right? There is so much of crime going on, terrorism going on, international, quote unquote, international diplomacy going on, right? But people and countries in power, they have become morally corrupt and morally weak, and they are trying to hide their moral weakness by showcasing that how, oh no, we are very gentle, we don't like aggression, right? So many times peace, the talk of peace and the morality of peace is many times being misused to mask one's moral weakness. So this is a trap that we should not fall into. It's very interesting. Vidura, while we know Vidura is a very gentle person, extremely devoted person, but when it comes to presenting the truth, he presents it ruthlessly, right? So so many times we have this kind of a stereotype understanding of a saint. A saint should be very gentle, soft spoken, right? But that's a very stereotype understanding. When it comes to protecting the truth, a saintly person can be harder than a thunderbolt, and sometimes can also be softer than a rose. So as a situation demands, a saintly person is willing to don any role to protect the truth. And that was the role that Vidura took. He immediately gave a straightforward opinion to Dhritarashtra, saying, "Throw this fellow out," right? And then he also tells him, if you don't remember Bhima, because Duryodhan was always scared of Bhima and saw him as his main rival. And so he was trying to remind Dhritarashtra, if you don't give up, if you further this war, remember the vengeful Bhima, like a hissing snake. He's just waiting for this opportunity of the war so that he can kill all your sons. Do you want to be responsible for the killing of all your sons? Right? And more so, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, is on their side. And he has already, if you look at the track record, Krishna defeated Jarasandha 17 times. So many Akshohinis of armies. In fact, Krishna single-handedly defeated more soldiers than the whole of Mahabharata put together, Mahabharata war put together. So look at the track record of Krishna, and he's on their side. So do you really want to risk taking up to this war, right? And look at the heavy statement he says. You are maintaining offense personified. This Duryodhan is offense personified. He is sin personified, and because he is envious of Lord Krishna, and because you are thus maintaining such a non-devotee of Krishna, you are devoid of all auspicious qualities. Relieve yourself of this ill fortune, and as soon as possible, and do good to this whole family. Throw this fellow out. But when this very straightforward, blunt statement was put across, Duryodhan was standing there, and he became enraged. Can you imagine? It is not that Vidura excused himself from the, he said, can we have a moment in private? can Dhritarashtra and I talk little confidentially? Right? Duryodhan, can you please go out, step aside for 5 minutes? We will call you back soon. Nothing. Right? No diplomacy. Just simple, straightforward, blunt truth. Right? Because sometimes you need to rip the band-aid out. And while it is nice to sit peacefully, behind the computer screen right now, perhaps in an air-conditioned room and listening to this katha and say, yes, very good. But sometimes when a saintly person does it to us, when we are on the receiving end, immediately we start blaming. Oh, spirituality does not work, or we blame the institution, we blame the person who was harsh with you, right? Oh, all the spiritualists are the same, this is all one big scam, or even to the point where God does not exist. So immediately when we are on the receiving end, so all these pastimes that we are studying in peace, the real test of our absorption is when in war, how well do we recall these? How well are we able to apply it? When a sadhu really rips that band-aid out of us, will we be grateful for that pain, or will we protest back, like Duryodhan? So then, when this happened, something extraordinary, and look at the kind of insult that Duryodhan says, asked him to come here, this son of a kept mistress. He is so crooked that he spies in the interest of the enemy against those on whose support he has grown up. Toss him out of the palace immediately and leave him with only his breath. So the only reward Vidura got for years, for decades of loyal, dedicated service to the throne of Hastinapur was his breath. In India, for many years, there used to be a pension gift. When a person retirement gift, some watch, some some tea set, some plate, so I'm talking about like 30-40 years. Today, there's no concept of it. People are just happy to let the person move on, right? But so at least some honorary something, at least a farewell party, something is thrown to an employee when they leave. But when Vidura was asked to leave, the only gift he got was his breath was given, which means his life was spared. That's the only respect he got. And what is on the other side, he got insults like he is a son of a kept mistress. So I think we discussed this in the first canto discussion, that how Vidura, when Pandu and Dhritarashtra were born, Amba and Ambalika, so they when Ambika was being impregnated, she got frightened. So therefore, Pandu was born, who had a pale complexion. when Ambalika was being impregnated. So then she closed her eyes. Consequently, Dhritarashtra was born blind. So Bhishma was very worried. So then he requests Vyasdev to empower to have one more child. So this time, the queen was so scared, she sends her mistress, her maid, to get blessed by Vyasa. And the maid was very strong. She very nicely pleases Vyasa, and consequently, she's blessed with a very, very powerful child. But unfortunately, because she was a maid, the child Vidura who was born, in fact, Vidura was more qualified to be the king than Pandu and Dhritarashtra. But unfortunately, being born of a maid servant, socially, politically, it was not apt. So Bhishma, being wise, he said, "You be the council, you be the prime minister for the king." And back then, prime minister would be the most important person. King would only intervene in some important matters, but the day-to-day affairs were all run by Vidura. In fact, Vidura was so smart. If you read the entire Mahabharata, one of the important Niti Shastras comes in Mahabharata, which is called Vidura Niti. Niti means like not just moral instructions, but even social, political, how to economic aspects. Today, we know the famous Chanakya Niti, but prior to Chanakya Niti itself was inspired by Vidura's Niti Sutras. That's how powerful Vidura was. He was an expert strategist, right? But even though Pandu and Dhritarashtra always saw him as his own brother, Duryodhan accuses him as being the son of a maid servant, and can you imagine how cheap that insult is, right? You're insulting a person's lineage, a person's birth, a person's family ancestry. So that kind of cheap remarks, when they were made, Vidura, his heart broke, and he didn't protest, he didn't react. Look, and this is very, very powerful. In fact, this is a very nice purport. We'll read this purport also, which is text number 16, which shows the consciousness of Vidura. He says, "Thus being pierced by arrows through his ears and afflicted to the core of his heart, Vidura placed his bow on the door and quit his brother's palace. He was not sorry, for he considered the acts of the external energy to be supreme." Very powerful. Prabhupada writes, "A pure devotee of the Lord is never perturbed by an awkward position created by external energy of the Lord." Now, this is the practical application of the philosophy of Krishna and his energies. The Parasha Shakti Vyudeva Shruvate, the absolute truth, has many energies, but this is such a powerful practical lesson. Sometimes Krishna's energies may act through different people. The agencies of Krishna's energies may be different, but a pure devotee only sees Krishna's energies at play, the three gunas at play. Sometimes when you see a conflict happening between you and others, or sometimes other people, when they're having a fight, understand it's not a fight between person A and person B, but rather it is the gunas of person A, their incompatibility with the gunas of person B. Or to put it in a more modern understanding, it's the psychology of A which is having a conflict with the psychology of B. The worldview of A is having a conflict with the worldview of B. But the problem is, ahankara vimudhatma karta aham iti manyate. Prabhupada quotes this, that the conditioned soul, influenced by the ahankar, the false ego, thinks that I am the doer. It's not my psychology or my gunas or my worldview having a clash with others. It is me who is having a clash with others. So the false ego makes things so personal, right? We fail to maintain the distance between us and the energies, the external energies of the Lord. And moment we start misidentifying with those external energies, that's what lead to all conflict and dissension. And that's what Prabhupada writes here. A conditioned soul is absorbed in material existence under the influence of the different modes of external energy. Absorbed in the false ego, he thinks that he is doing everything by himself. The external energy of the Lord, the material nature, is fully under the control of the Supreme Lord, and the conditioned soul is fully under the grip of this external energy. Therefore, the conditioned soul is fully under the control of the law of the Lord. But due to illusion only, he thinks himself independent in these activities. Duryodhan was acting under such influence of the external nature, by which he should be vanquished at the ultimate end. So understand, at one level, one may misinterpret this statement saying, oh, if you say that ultimately it's a Lord's external energy only which is acting, then I am not responsible for all the sinful activities that I am not responsible for the fight. It is Lord's energy who is responsible for the fight. Right? So it's not like that. Think of it this way. Imagine sunlight is there everywhere. Whether you sow rice or some useful seed, or will you sow a weed? That choice is there with you. The sunlight will equally nourish. So Krishna's energies will equally nourish. At every moment, we have a choice. Do you want to be an agent of Krishna's external energy, is Mahamaya, or you want to be an agent of Krishna's internal energy, the Yogamaya? Prabhupada many times would also give the analogy of electricity. Electricity is always there. If you plug in a heater, it gives heat. If you plug in a cooler, it gives cooling. So will you blame the electricity for making the room hot or cold? Electricity is just electricity, right? You chose to transfer that electricity to a particular medium. That instrument you chose, you made the choice. So you cannot blame electricity for overheating or overcooling of a room, right? So the choice is always there with us. So it is such a beautiful application of this philosophy of what we study in the Chatushloki Bhagavatam. And so now the practical application, look what Vidura is going to do now. While Duryodhan was acting under the influence of external energy, and therefore he could not accept the advice of Vidura, Vidura could understand this because he was a pure devotee of the Lord. In spite of being strongly insulted by Duryodhana's words, Vidura could see that Duryodhan, under the influence of Maya, was making progress on the path towards his own ruination. He therefore considered the acts of external energy to be supreme. Yet, he also saw, this is the powerful point which I wanted to emphasize, he also saw in that situation how the internal energy of the Lord helped him in that particular situation. For 100 years almost, Vidura was stuck in the politics of the palace of Hastinapur. For once, he is getting a break. I don't have to be stuck in this palace politics anymore. I can go on a pilgrimage. I can come closer to Krishna. I can enhance my spiritual quotient. So the same act which on Duryodhana, it was the influence of external energy. On Vidura, it was the influence of internal energy, the spiritual energy. So what is material, what is spiritual is a choice that we have to make in every situation. That is why Krishna consciousness is a moment-to-moment choice that we make at every step in our life. So we cannot just blindly just follow anything and everything. So at every moment we have to apply. It's not like some kind of a mechanical routine. It's not like some, automatic technique, but rather at every moment you have to make a choice, right? When you suddenly have some pain in your stomach, right? You have a choice to make. Will you shout at your mom for cooking something that didn't go well with you? Or will you just feel grateful that, oh, perhaps this is an opportunity for me to learn that I should stop overeating, right? Will you grow, or will you protest? Will you become angry in that situation? So when you take the path of growth, you are allowing the internal energy to influence you. When you take the path of your anarthas, then you're allowing the external energy to influence you. So that's a choice. So that's why many times when people say that, oh, I'm helpless, the situation just forced me, I'm a victim of circumstance, da da da, right? That doesn't help. It's a choice that you have to make. Even amidst the greatest calamity, we always have the greatest opportunity to grow in our consciousness. In fact, greater the calamity, greater the opportunity, right? So when recently this Russia-Ukraine war was going on, the devotees saw a great opportunity. Let us go give prasad distribution on both sides. So on both sides of the fence, they were distributing prasad, right? So for them, the greater the calamity, greater is the opportunity to serve Krishna and his creation and other living entities. So this is the very powerful lesson, that how the Lord's energy is always acting. When you see Krishna's hand in it, then immediately it is Krishna's Yogamaya. Please don't think Yogamaya is only reserved for those advanced souls. Even you and I, when we make the right choice of growth, immediately Krishna's internal energy will come upon us. What is the proof of that? You will start growing in your Shraddha. Your Shraddha, your spiritual conviction starts to become stronger and stronger. Right? These are those special moments in our life where we grow, which will make us the years later you'll realize, yes, that particular year 2026, I was going through a great calamity in my life, but I made a choice not to see myself as a victim, but learning to see Krishna in that pain, in that difficult situation. How can I grow? Learning to see Krishna doesn't mean, oh Krishna, you are giving me suffering, so let me continue to suffer. That's not the thing. Learning to see Krishna means learning to see an opportunity to grow internally, right? Then, oh, now today I'm grateful for that 2026 suffering, right? And that's the beauty of these spiritual things, of the spiritual growth, the spiritual joy. Spiritual joy is many times realized only in retrospect. When you are in that situation, in that moment, you may not realize it. But when you go back, then you will realize, this was the day I really grew, right? So then Vidura was so happy. He chose, and look what happens. In fact, the title, we finally come to the title of today's class. Today's class was titled as When Dharma Walks Away, When Dharma Leaves. So look what happened to Hastinapur. When Dharma leaves, the vacuum that Dharma creates is immediately filled with suffering. So when we go through suffering in our life, suffering doesn't mean like, even major calamities. Sometimes there's some kind of mental anxiety. We should ask ourselves, where have I deviated from the path of Dharma? At a more practical level, our Dharma is in terms of our commitment to our spiritual practice, our sadhana. Let's break it down to a very, very simple understanding. Whenever, in fact, the root cause of all problems in our life is the reduction in the quality of our sadhana. Weak sadhana equals problems in life, period. Now, you may start now digging into the causation theory. Oh, really? So you mean yesterday my boss shouted at me in the office because I didn't chant attentively? How does the boss know? Krishna can know as Paramatma, right? How did my boss know that I didn't chant attentively? No, your boss always shouts at you. The days you are not attentive in your japa, it hurts more. That's the point. So the nature of this material world is dukkhalaya mashashvatam. It will always give you suffering. So problems will always be problems. But the magnitude of the problem changes based on your consciousness. When you become low in your consciousness, all problems start to look big. When you grow in your consciousness, the problems start to look small, right? So stop blaming people and situations and places and all the things. Start owning the responsibility for the problems in your life by taking a commitment to grow in your consciousness. And this is what happens when Vidura left, when we deviate from the path of Dharma, problems are bound to come, and that's what happened to Hastinapur. As soon as Dharma personified, and we discussed last time, who is Vidura? Vidura is Yamaraj himself. He is Dharmaraj himself, Dharma personified. And when Dharma was thrown out of the kingdom, great calamity fell upon the palace of Hastinapura. The great war happened and everybody got wiped out. Can you imagine? Everybody got, just 3 people survived. Those who participated in the war, just 3 people survived. That's the extent of the calamity that happened, right? And then Vidura took this as an advantage, and very beautifully Bhagavatam describes all the holy places that he goes to, you know, of Ayodhya, Dwaraka, Mathura, and he goes to all these places along the banks of Saraswati also, right? At that time, Saraswati river was still flowing, and which used to cover provinces of modern day Punjab and Rajasthan, which is now a desert, but that whole point at one point was like a riverbed. So all those places, he goes to Prabhasa Kshetra, and that's where he gets to know about the news of the whole war of Kurukshetra and how everybody got wiped out. Then some important locations are also described. Holy places like Trita, Ushana, Manu, Prutu, Agni, Asita, Vayu, Sudasa, all these important places of pilgrimage are also highlighted. Today, the names are different, but understand the Saraswati river was very active and it was flowing back then. And there were many thriving civilizations there, thriving villages there. And also it is described as so many temples of Lord Vishnu also established along those places. And he also passed through wealthy provinces like Surat, which is still there in Gujarat, Shavira and Matsya through Western India. And he goes from, so basically he's traveling from, so from Hastinapura, he's traveling through all these provinces, right? And finally, he goes through all these locations. He goes for Prabhasa Kshetra is in Gujarat. So from Hastinapur, he travels to Gujarat, and then he is all on the way back. He travels through the provinces of Punjab, Rajasthan, Haryana today, and comes to the river Yamuna. And there at the banks of Yamuna, he meets Uddhava. Uddhava is also another great devotee. So, and also another very interesting parallel between our Dhritarashtra and Vidura. When calamity came in in Dhritarashtra's life, he chose the path of paralysis. I don't want to move. Vidura, when calamity came in his life, he chose the path of pilgrimage, a journey within and without, both internally. Any pilgrimage is a it seems like an external journey, but actually it's a journey inside. So in many times when difficulties come, we have to be prepared to make some drastic changes in our life. And status quo is the greatest enemy for a spiritualist, right? In fact, sometimes devotees, they greet each other and say, Hari Bol, how are things going? Oh yes, everything is normal as it is, right? Well, if sometimes they say it casually, but if really things are as it is normal, then something is terribly wrong, because the material world is like a inclined slope. You are either struggling to go up or you are comfortably sliding down. So status quo means sliding down, right? So externally, a devotee may look peaceful like a swan, floating in a lake, but under the water, their legs are flapping. So you cannot judge the struggles devotees go through by looking at them externally, right? But the point here is that the status quo, don't get attached to that status quo mode. Every day may not be external, but it is internally. You have to challenge yourself by learning something new, practicing something new, reading something new, engaging yourself in a kind of a service that is new. The options are unlimited, right? So this movement is necessary, internal or external. There has to be some kind of a constant movement. That's what the whole, when we say life is a pilgrimage, you cannot stay in one place and say pilgrimage. You cannot remain in status quo all the time and say it's a pilgrimage. So Dhritarashtra, he was stuck. When you don't go on a pilgrimage, you enter into a state of paralysis. So when misery came, Dhritarashtra chose the path of paralysis. And Vidura had to go shake him out of his paralytic mode. That wake up, leave this home, go do something about your spirituality. We saw that already, like that. And then he was traveling alone through all the, it is described, all these places. Vidura was traveling alone. And this is also a very important point. Many times, traditionally, these pilgrimages were not done. Of course, depends on the kind of traditions also, but traditionally these they were not done in large groups, because it's usually a solitary journey that people would take up to, right? So, and Vidura, it seems like he was living in the palace, constantly surrounded by people, and suddenly when he was thrown out of the palace, did he start feeling lonely? In fact, today loneliness is a big word. It is this unspoken pandemic all over the world. Some countries have ministry of loneliness also. Apparently, I was shocked to know that people are seriously, even governments are worried about their citizens becoming more and more lonely, right? So I remember many years ago, there were some college students, uh, and they came to GEV, and His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj was addressing the students. And one of the students asked this question about, and I remember that time, that was when the loneliness, it became buzzword that time. And so the student asked this question about dealing with loneliness. And then Radhanath Maharaj, referring to his book, about his journey, he answered that, actually, loneliness and solitude both look the same externally, right? For a materialist, or a person who's not connected to themselves, they will be overwhelmed with loneliness. But a seeker who's trying to connect to themselves and to the divine, that very concept of loneliness transforms into solitude, right? And sometimes this is also a point we need to understand. Sometimes to uphold something, it is worth breaking away from the mainstream thought process. Rather than just for a sense of belonging, you compromise on truth and your own ethics and your values, right? So so this principle of that Vidura here is highlighting how, because he did not want to compromise on his own principles, on his own spiritual principles, he chose to isolate himself. And in that, he did not become lonely, but rather he experienced the inner solitude. And in that space, he was able to take up to this pilgrimage, like that. So then, when Vidura meets Uddhava, very beautiful, he asks the well-being of all the residents of the Yadu dynasty, not knowing what happened to them. In fact, if you remember our first canto, when Vidura comes back from pilgrimage, the Pandavas, Yudhishthir Maharaj wanted to ask this. He asked the same series of questions. How is this? How is Vasudev? How is Devaki? How is Balaram? How is Anuruddha? How is Pradyumna? How is Satyabhama? How is Rukmini? So a series of questions, that exactly similar questions. Now it is Vidura, who did not know what happened in Dwarika. He asked the same questions to Uddhava. Very beautifully he highlights. And if you look at these verses, I think almost around 15 verses, he asked these questions, and you may be wondering, why is Sukhdev Goswami giving all these details to Parikshit Maharaj? Right? As if he doesn't know who's in the family of You could have summarized the whole statement saying, and Vidura inquired about the well-being of the residents of Dwarika. But behind these questions, you will understand the personal nature of Vidura. Every single person he is asking, he glorifies that person. One important quality about that person he asks, and he mentions, how that person has inspired him, right? Like he says, how is Anuruddha doing? He is a fulfiller of all the desires of pure devotees. And it is said that the Rig Veda came from him. He is an avatar of Mahavishnu. The Rig Veda came from him. How is Akrura? He is a faultless soul surrendered to the Supreme Lord. And he recalls how once, while going to Vrindavan, he lost his equilibrium in ecstasy and he fell on the floor, the dust of Vrindavan, and was offering prayers to the dust of Vrindavan, looking at footprints of Lord Krishna. So every personality, he recalls them by name and their good qualities, and then he asks about how they are. So like that, he ends this chapter by remembering all these great personalities. And then what Uddhava replies is going to be a small glimpse of the 10th canto, right in 3rd canto. Entire Krishna's pastimes from his birth, all his Vrindavan Lila, his Mathura Lila, his Dwaraka Lila, and Hastinapur Lila also. All of that is going to be summarized by Uddhava. Uddhava is going to remember Krishna. Very, very emotional chapter, because Uddhava, he's already feeling the pain of separation from Krishna. And when he experiences that pain, he chose not to sit and sulk, but rather feel more connected to Krishna by engaging in Krishna Katha. A very, very powerful theme that we will see the next almost 3 chapters, that Uddhava is going to remember Krishna fondly. So we will see those discussions in our next class. Let's quickly open the forum for any quick questions or comments, if there are any. There is a question already in the chat box. It says, should we be like Vidura in our material dealings? Many a times to manage job, relation, we act diplomatically. On one hand, we somehow want to manage. On other hand, it feels hypocrisy. Okay, so first we should understand what is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy does not mean when you are just doing the needful and not getting entangled in something. That's not what called hypocrisy. When you put your ego in the forefront and you're trying to gain some kind of an egoistic gain out of it, egoistic pleasure out of it, and disguising it by something else, that is called hypocrisy. So if you look at the whole principle that Krishna spoke in the Bhagavad Gita of engaging in a detached way, engaging in actions in a detached way, that's a principle that Vidura is also highlighting here. So definitely, yes, that's the way to go ahead. But the thing is, this is an effect and not the cause. You have to understand this properly. When we engage in our sadhana properly, when we build our consciousness, the effect of that is we naturally act as how Vidura does. If you prematurely try to do that, you end up imitating Vidura and you will create further problems for yourself. So the point here is that you get inspired by Vidura, but don't imitate Vidura. Okay, let's see some questions. Yes, Harshika, go ahead.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, sir. I really liked the example you gave of when you said Dhritarashtra. I hope I'm audible clearly and
Yes.
too windy or anything.
Yeah.
When you said that with the Dhritarashtra example that don't use helplessness as the guise for your material attachments. So I guess the question is, and to also the answer you gave now, right? Not to imitate, to know your position. So there is one thing of not even recognizing that you have material attachments and therefore saying, oh, I'm helpless, this is just how it is, the situation is. The other is to recognize that I have material attachments, but then to not be ready to give up those material attachments, and then to then have somebody like Vidura as the ideal that you are looking up to. But what do you do in the interim?
So that's the whole journey, right? So it begins with unconscious incompetency. We don't even know that we are incompetent. We don't even know that we don't know the standard. Then gradually with spiritual education, first thing that happens is conscious incompetency. We become aware of our limitations, of how incompetent we are, right? And that's where our personal practice and application comes in. And as you're growing gradually, it becomes conscious competency, meaning you very consciously are doing it. And sometimes you will fumble. That happens, right? You, like a kid learning to walk, you will fumble, but taking support of the same ground, you stand up and keep going. To the point where now at an advanced stage like Vidura, now it becomes unconscious competency. It becomes your second nature. So that's a whole journey that we have to go through. But the reason why we are reading the scriptures is to at least recognize the problem. Recognizing the problem is half the problem solved, right? At least know that we are incompetent. No? That's the understanding that we're trying to gain here.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, Apurva.
Hare Krishna. Am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, Prabhuji, in the 30th verse of this chapter, Prabhupada writes in the purport that when Lord Krishna descends into the material world, all his plenary portions also appear with him to exhibit different functions.
Mm-hmm.
But for the pastimes at Vrindavan, all functions are performed by the Lord's different plenary portions. Can you please help me understand this? The difference is not clear to me.
Okay. So when Krishna leaves Vrindavan, so first of all, Krishna never leaves Vrindavan, right? So one thing we understand is the first statement where Prabhupada writes that how when Lord Krishna descends, all his plenary portions also appear with him to exhibit his different functions. But for the pastimes of Vrindavan, all functions are performed by Lord's different plenary expansions. So we need to understand that, for example, the Lord has his, if you remember when we discussed the third chapter of the first canto, we discussed the different kinds of avatars. So there are plenary portions and there are portions of plenary portions and there are expansions. So when Krishna is in Vrindavan, so Krishna has his, so Krishna, Balarama, and sometimes Krishna takes, sometimes we refer to Krishna as Govinda, Madan Mohana, Gopinatha, because the moods are different, right? So all the pastimes of Krishna in Vrindavan are personally performed by him. But the moment Krishna has to leave Vrindavan, there he empowers his Vasudev expansion to say, okay, now you go kill Kamsa. You go take care of all the demons. And when Krishna, that's why our Acharyas also describe that how Krishna in Dwarika is perfect, but Krishna in Mathura is more perfect, and Krishna in Vrindavan is most perfect. Meaning Krishna in his complete form, self-same form, manifests only in the Vrindavan pastimes. And but then when Krishna also descends, he also brings with him all these other manifestations. So that is why when we spoke about Aniruddha and Pradyumna, they are all expansions of the different Purusha avatars, and also expansions of the Chaturvyuha, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, Vasudeva. They are all born accordingly. So that Prabhupada is highlighting here that if you see that, in fact, the verse in this connection is regarding Samba, who was Kartikeya, whose Kartikeya happens to be Pradyumna in the spiritual world, like that. So that those aspects he is highlighting here. Yeah, so he even right. It is learned that Kamadeva appeared as Pradyumna and Kartikeya as Samba and the Vasus as Uddhava. So all this, and it's very interesting because you noted, you highlighted this question. When you read certain, especially when the disappearance pastime will be the fight in the Prabhasa Kshetra, all that is discussed. One of the verses says that how all of Krishna's Yaduvamshas, they went back to heavenly planets. Now, our acharyas enter there and they describe, what do you mean by going to heavenly planets? They are all associates of Krishna. How did, and here it says that they are all expansions of Krishna, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Anuruddha, Vasudeva. Why did they go to heaven? Shouldn't they be going to the spiritual world, back to their respective Vaikuntha planets? Why does Bhagavatam say they go to heavenly planets? So within the same body exists a portion of, so if you remember the 10th canto, when Brahmaji goes to pray Kshirsagara, the voice of Krishna comes and says, all the devatas go take birth on planet Earth. So it is, Jiva Goswami explains this, that within the same body of Krishna's Yaduvamsha associates is one devata and also one expansion of the Lord, one personal associate of the Lord or expansion of the Lord. And when the pastime is over, that portion of the particular devata goes back to heaven, and that portion who is the expansion of Supreme Lord, it goes back to the Vaikuntha Lokas or the Paravyama, beyond the material world. So this is how Srila Jiva Goswami explains this. So yeah, so this also happens sometimes within the same associate of the Lord. Two different personalities are also playing that role, like that.
Thank you.
Okay, let's end our discussion here. So we'll all meet again next week. Hare Krishna.